Hi, this is Kevin Martin. Welcome to Between the Vines. I'm here with the other team members of LERGP, two-state program by Cornell and Penn State. Uh, with me now is Jennifer Phillips Russo and Andy Musa. I want to talk about a few different things today. Um, I took a look at wage rates for dormant season work, which is the bulk of labor costs in the Concord industry. And I do want to cover some of the results of that sort of quick look I took. And I think we're in the season of post bloom spraying as well as crop estimation. So we are going to cover that as well. And I can turn it over to Jen, and we'll start with crop estimation.
Hi, thank you, Kevin. Hi, everybody. Jennifer Phillips Russo, Cornell University. I just want to give you a little bit of a heads up that in Portland, New York, at the Cornell Lake Erie Research and Extension Laboratory, we have been tracking our Concord berry weights for many years, probably over 2 decades now. And in doing so, Dr. Terry Bates has put together the Concord berry curve. We have found that 30 days after bloom, at 30 days after bloom is approximately 50% of what your final fresh berry weight is going to be. So when you hear us talking a lot about it's 30 days post bloom, do your crop estimation. These are the reasons why. He has tracked berry development over the years and has figured out that at 30 days post bloom, you are at 50% of your fresh berry weight. That's why we always tell you to go out and take your crop estimation at that time. And just to let you know, I just put it in the crop update. I think it was 2 weeks ago, trying to prepping you, getting you ready to get your crop estimation done because it has to go by your bloom date. Ours at Clairol was June 7th. That means July 7th, we need to be taking our crop estimation, and that's coming right up around the corner here. Kevin, when we were talking about this earlier, there are a bunch of different ways you can do it. You can do it by hand and you can do it mechanically. And I will be sending it out again. There's a fact sheet right on our website, lergp.com, that sort of explains that and runs you through a couple scenarios on how to do that. You can cut a rope that is about 1/100th of your acreage. And you can then lay that out and harvest all of the fruit on that length of that rope and extrapolate your numbers, or you can choose vines that are representative of the variation. Again, I will have it all in the crop update for you. Please call me if you have any questions on how to do that or when to do that, but you should do it 30 days post bloom from your bloom date in your vineyards.
Or more. 35 is okay.
It's okay if you don't get out there on the 30th date. That is correct.
Yes. You do just need to know what you're at in terms of bloom date. So
right.
Well, you got our calendar and you mark down your bloom date for your vineyards.
But look for that. Look for it in this week's crop update as well. I will keep reminding you until it gets there.
Yeah, I think in terms of crop estimation this year, there may be some thinning that occurs and is accelerated or motivated by crop estimation. So that's not an outside possibility. We were a week early, is that right?
We were a week early, yes.
Right. So the pressure on thinning is going to be less than it normally would be because we do have the ability to ripen a little bit more. Do you know how much more that is?
So rumor has it that for every 3 days, or like 3 days longer of the growing season, you can ripen 1 ton of grapes.
So Jen says rumor, but it's actually really good research.
I don't know the research behind it, otherwise I would have stated that, but I have all of the growers telling me that, so that's why I'm going off of what they said.
Yeah, that was some work Terry Bates did, and it really related to bloom date and veraison date because you don't tend to gain very many days in between bloom and veraison. So you don't really expect to gain anything. So we kind of know where we're going to be at veraison, and we know how many days early we're going to be at veraison. But you can lose some of that potential because it's not exact. I think the average is 70 days or 69.
69, 70 days, yes.
Right. Exactly. But it's plus or minus a few in there. So you could technically lose, but it's fairly unlikely. And given the weather we've had, it seems even less unlikely. I remember a couple of years ago, we were talking about how hot and dry could make us lose dates between bloom and veraison because it was so hot and so dry. But I've never actually seen it happen. I think it was more of a theoretical discussion like, well, yeah, if it was 110 every day at night, the vines would shut down and we could actually lose days. But I've never actually, we've definitely seen it happen with really rainy, cold summers where we do lose days, but never heat and dry that I can recall.
So it usually gets up about the magic number that I have heard and discussed with Terry is at 90 degrees Fahrenheit, the stomatal connectivity that just shuts down.
Right. But then you're taking that sort of scientific knowledge and applying it to the real world where, how often do you have to be above 90 to actually lose a day? Um, if you spend 3 days above 90 on one summer, is that any different than having a bunch of cool, cloudy, lousy days on another summer? And, so how does it impact your average? And I don't think we've ever seen it negatively impact the average because we haven't spent enough daylight hours above 90 degrees. I mean, maybe we will with climate change, but I don't think we've ever been there. Um, but yeah, anyway, where I was going with that is even if you're not really considering thinning, because there are definitely going to be some growers that aren't, you want to use this to inform your harvest schedule and your disease management strategy. And we've said that 100 times, but if you forgot, you haven't heard it, or you don't believe us, it really is an effective mode of using the data that you have access to. Is all you have to do is gather it to make sure you make good decisions about disease management and predicting when harvest is going to happen for you and scheduling harvest. And if you don't have an idea of crop size and the variability within blocks of what that crop size looks like, you guess and you guess wrong sometimes. And I know I can't pick up a grapevine and just know how much that block is going to have on it. So Andy, what are you seeing in, Pennsylvania? I know in terms of crop estimation, I know we were really concerned about certain areas that had just not stopped growing.
Yeah.
What do those
Again,
look like now? Do you know?
this is the first week that I actually haven't gone back to that, but every week since the frost occurred, I have. And last week, those those berries on those 5-inch, 3 to 5 inch shoots were they were still growing, and some of them had 2 clusters on it. It was weird, but it was varied. Some of the clusters looked okay. Now that was 2 weeks ago, and then others they were really scraggly. So you had only a few berries on it. So I didn't get a chance to look at those this week, but it's going to be interesting to see what happens on those.
You're saying some of those 6-inch shoots have really nice looking clusters on them?
I mean, they're progressing. They were progressing just at the same rate as the other shoots. It was weird. I mean, sizing up, but again,
Jen, when you lean back, you bump
How many
something.
flat leaves are on there? I mean, is there enough leaf area to support it?
That's just it. There's not going to be on those shoots, so I don't think they're going to do anything.
It'd be very interesting
But
to watch.
depending if they send out enough laterals and stuff. But at this point, they don't look like, and if they haven't by now,
They probably won't.
Right.
yeah. So it's really weird, but that's that one area. So like I said, towards the escarpment is the same. They've got the frost issue, but there's a lot of stuff from Route 5 to maybe mid Route 20 that really has some nice looking crops.
I agree.
And so guys are debating now, and this happens every year, should I put on a second post bloom spray or not? And I know that we've talked about it a little bit at this coffee pot meeting we just had, that we are suggesting that if you've got a good crop, to put that second post bloom on, because you're going to have to get that crop ripe. And if this is the last spray you're going to put on, you might as well, put on good materials for powdery mildew and other diseases. But the only thing we're really seeing now is powdery as far as disease situation. Most guys have done a pretty good job. There's a couple of vineyards out there that I'd be a little bit concerned with how much they have as far as clusters. And I don't know if they missed that spray as far as stretch intervals, or even, I don't know what materials in those vineyards I was looking at they used. But most of the guys I think have done a pretty nice job. So, but yeah, if you got those bigger crops, definitely put on a second spray. And then the other thing is outlook, and we're approaching the 810 berry moth growing degree days, and most of the stations here, anywhere from this Wednesday, which is July 1st, through July 5th in the Lake Erie region. That's the period there where these vineyards will be reaching that 810 for berry moth. And I did pick up berry moth eggs when I was out the other day. So I would suggest that growers in the high risk areas, check their newest stations and apply those sprays. And if you're in low and intermediate blocks, make sure you go out and scout and look for those stings now and see if you're at that 6%. And if you are, put on a spray.
So Andy, I've had growers ask me, is it okay to put it on a little bit early, a little earlier than the 810?
Yeah, it is. If you're, the 810 is what we say you should get it on by for if you're using certain materials like Intrepid, Alticore, Verdeprin, I think that's how you pronounce it.
Delegate.
And Alticore, Delegate. We want that on really before egg laying starts. So, there's always some earlier egg laying, I believe. Well, I know it goes on even before the 810.
They don't all do it at the same time, right?
So, that 810 is a really tough, within a day or two, especially these temperatures, we scoop real fast past that 810. So I would suggest that guys, put it on maybe 2 or 3 days earlier if you're using those types of materials. If not, after the 810, I think the model says 811 to 900, if you're using a contact rather than ingested. So,
Yeah, and I think you really want to make sure you know how to use the berry moth model on NUA, and make sure just this time of year, you don't have to do it all the time, but just for the last 5 days and the next 5 days, depending on where you're at, just check that thing every day, because we were accumulating 15, 16 growing degree days. The forecast was showing things like 18, 21, 22, and instead we got 34, 35, 36. Makes a really big difference in terms of when you're going to spray.
Right.
So Andy's saying 3 days. If it's really hot out, that means you're going to start spraying at like 710 growing degree days. You're going to start that sprayer up.
yeah,
And in 2 days, you're going to be well past 810
yeah.
on those hot days.
I'm going 2 or 3 days. Generally they say start at 750. I don't know about the 710. I'd have to look at how many degree days you're growing, you're getting during those. But like you said, you're up in the 80s and 90s. You're getting 28 to 30, 31 growing degree days.
Right.
So I don't know. I think that's something we really do have to look into is how many days before that 810 possibly. I think there needs to be more research, but I say at least, maybe 3 days before that. And the other reason I say that is because, those materials like, for instance, Intrepid, they last longer than some of these other materials, I think, at least from what we're seeing, and at least from some of the generic maybe pyrethroids that are out there. So even if you put it on a couple days before the 8-10, you've got, you know, you've got enough days there that the longevity would take you, you know, past that 8-10 for that egg laying. So that's why. And again, I would like to see some more research done on that to really nail this down.
And Andy, just to be clear for some of our new growers who might be out there listening, we say that these certain days, and we say egg laying because it's ingested by the larva as it tries to enter the berry. So I just you want to get it on before they actually get inside the berry.
Right. And that's the contact. And some of these materials for the egg laying, they found out that, you know, that is effective. It affects, for instance, Intrepid is a insect growth regulator. So they found out that it does, you know, affect them in the egg stage. So that's why you want to put those materials on, you know, as soon as you can when they start laying the eggs. Whereas the other materials are contact. So, you know, they will, as they eat their way out of the egg and crawl along the berry, if it's sprayed, then they'll accumulate that material. So that's why we say with those other materials to put it on while they're egg laying or before. But
one
again,
of the things I've heard growers doing, and this probably only applies to Intrepid right now, just because of cost, but we're seeing growers using higher rates of Intrepid, spraying a little bit earlier in the hopes that it has more longevity. So they're worried about, you know, the beginning of that bell curve before 8-10 and extending it past the, you know, the end of the fat part of that curve past 900. And so that's what they're trying to do. I don't know if you have an opinion on that, but using the full rate of Intrepid or close to it is what I've seen growers in high pressure situations doing.
yeah, I think they probably should, because it will give them, you know, longer time. And they've shown that in other growth regulators. I'm trying to think of the one before Intrepid. I think it was called Confirm, and that was the one right before. And they did find, I talked to, in fact, Dave Bidinger, who's down at Biglerville, and they use it on apples. And he was involved working for a chemical company back then that made Confirm, and I can't think of the company that made it, but he said that the higher rates, you definitely did get longer time period out of the effectiveness. Yeah. So, and again, Confirm was another insect growth regulator, the one that was before Intrepid.
Yeah, and I mean, probably theoretically you could do that with some of the other materials, but in Concord, most growers I don't think are using higher rates of things like Altacor just because of cost. It's certainly not Verdeperin. I wouldn't even recommend higher rates of Verdeperin. I think you've got to figure out another solution unless you're really desperate and you're talking about 14 rows in Pennsylvania next to a ravine. But for your wider acreage, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But yeah, I mean, that's where I got to that 700 growing degree days. I think that's what a lot of growers are doing when it's very hot out, is a high rate of Intrepid, not too far after 700. And then, you know, 3 days later, they're at 810 and it takes them 4 or 5 days to spray. I think the only thing they've got working for them is a lot of our larger growers move around. So just because one block is at 810 doesn't mean they all are.
And I'm not, this is sort of my own personal opinion with this is not anything that, you know, we've done specifically that I could say they did research on. And yeah, now we're changing from the 810 to 700. I'm not saying that, but I do suggest that growers, you know, play around with some of that stuff, like you said, and keep an eye on it and saying, okay, I've changed this practice and tried this and it really worked. And, you know, do it in a couple blocks, but keep track of it. But you know, they are laying eggs. You know, all of the berry moth don't come out at the same time, and all of them don't lay eggs at the same time. And we usually see, you know, more problems with this in later generations. just because the population builds up and there's so much crossover that, towards the end of the season, egg laying almost is, especially if we get another generation, late generation, continual. So, but yeah, I think growers should try that and, see how it works. The other thing is, a lot of guys say 8-10 and boom, they think they have to get it on right at 8-10, and with the acreage, you can't do that.
Right.
I was going to say the model tells you to
Right.
put it right
As
at right,
close.
as close as you can. So I don't think we're necessarily deviating from the model with anything we're talking about. We're just talking about strategies to get as close to 8-10 as you possibly
Yes.
can.
With all the acreage
Yes.
that you have.
And the other thing is too, you don't have to spray all your acreage with, especially if you have rows that are, parallel to the woods or whatever. You don't have to spray if you got a 50-acre block and you only have one side that has woods. Chances are if you've been, taking care of your vineyards, that, your pressure is going to be right along the border. So, I tell guys, as long as that your pressure is just along the border, you've been taking care of the berry moth, your interior, I tell guys maybe try 10 rows from the woods, especially when they're talking about, they worry about the price. And oh boy, I'm not spraying the whole 50 acres with Intrepid because that's too expensive. Then I'll say, okay, try this, try spraying 10 rows, or depending on how far it goes into the vineyard where it was bad. And then see if, further into the vineyard, you even have to put an insecticide on, or if you do, and if through scouting you've determined that you do, then maybe you could use some of the less expensive materials, because generally, again, with berry moth, you got a big acre block and most of it's not surrounded by woods. It's, as further you go in, it's going to decrease and your berry moth population is going to drop. So that's one way I try and convince growers to use some of these materials that are more targeted. They might be a little bit more expensive for berry moth. Trying to convince them that, hey, then spray, so many rows along your border rather than your entire acreage. And, guys seem to like that a little bit more than having to spray their entire block with.
Yeah. I think part of the problem is that insecticides, as they get older, continue to get cheaper for the most part. And that's not always true. 7's a really nice example of something that's way more expensive than it should be if you were pricing things based on, how old the material is and how effective it still is. That's sort of an outlier. But, the Mustang Maxes of the world and bifenthrins have continued to get cheaper and cheaper to the point where they're not getting cheaper anymore because they can't. Nobody's going to give it to you for free. And that's like what we're on the verge of at this point. That doesn't necessarily mean, Intrepid is an expensive material. And I would sort of push back on the idea that you should consider it expensive just because bifenthrin is significantly cheaper. To me, an expensive material is, it takes a great deal of investment and costs a lot of money per acre, and the results are, not necessarily commensurate with that investment. Intrepid is cheaper than Leverage 360 was when it first hit the market. So, on that scale, it's very inexpensive. On the scale of comparing it to the cost of Leverage 360 now, it's probably double. But the point is, you're looking at a fairly inexpensive material, considering that it's a completely different mode of action and it's going to do a better job, and grape prices are over $300 a ton. You're going to, yeah.
Big crop out there.
Yeah, and there's a big crop out there. We're talking about trying to save a very, very, very small percentage of your crop. And the one thing I'll point out, since we don't have an IPM person, because this is not very IPM-like, probably get yelled at if we ever get an IPM person. Hopefully we do. But
Here we go.
The old Grape Berry Moth model with the economic thresholds was calculated based on getting your crop into the plant. So those thresholds of, I think the second generation right now you'd be scouting for is 6%. If you're above 6%, you're at risk of getting your crop rejected if they actually find the Grape Berry Moth. If you're below it, you're probably going to make it in. Grape Berry Moth, we've seen this very clearly in Niagara. I don't know if it's been as well established in Concord, but it creates crop loss, significant crop loss, well below those thresholds. So they were not looking at crop loss. They were not looking at berry shelling, secondary rots caused by damage to the fruit. None of that was calculated in that economic threshold. So we're missing a whole economic benefit of maintaining your yield and keeping insect pressure at bay that was not calculated in that 6% rate. So I would take a look and see 6% and think now is time where I really need to use my best materials, because getting rejected is really worst case scenario. And I'm trying to keep it below that. I'm not just trying to make sure that I can not be rejected. So if I can do that for $10 an acre, I'm going to do it. I'm not just doing 12 rows.
Well, yeah, but we've always been, and again, we're talking, say, with Concord growers, because, and I'm looking over the years because of the economic situation a lot of times. Now this year, like you said, with the cost, that shouldn't be as much a consideration.
Right.
It really shouldn't. But, we face this all the time. I think growers, and again, depending on the economic situation, look at the cost of the material. And I mean, I remember years ago, and you guys probably don't because you're younger than I am, but when guys were using parathione, and it was like $2.10 an acre, and we're running a pest management program, and I had a couple growers tell me, hey, I could spray 3 times with parathione, and you're charging $7.50 an acre to do this pest management program. And so we've always been combating that. I think growers a lot of times just look at the cost of the material and say, wow, that's going to be too expensive. And like you said, Kevin, they don't look at is, okay, how effective really was it? So if I have to go back in and spray again, or if I lose X percentage of the crop because it just didn't work because the egg laying went on longer than the material lasted, then what are you gaining? I mean, because you're still spending the time on the tractor. It's your labor, your fuel costs, and what were the results that you got out of that?
Sure.
So
and I think if you're going to tell a grower to use verdeperin on 12 rows, he might tell you that he's nuts because of that culture of saving money at $50 an acre. And I would say you're probably right. He should use verdeperin as an alternative on 12 rows. But I think what I'm trying to say is that as the price of insecticides has continued to fall over the last 10 years, certain insecticides that target Grape Berry Moth, the perception of what is expensive has been redefined. So because bifenthrin is cheaper, when bifenthrin was $6 an acre, $6 an acre was cheap. But now all of a sudden, $8 an acre is expensive. And that's where I'm given sort of that thought process a little bit of pushback. Certainly, there's a very high need to be focused on price in Concord, and that's always going to be there. And to the extent that price isn't the only thing, and you do need to make investments, there's going to be some pushback because defaulting to buying the cheapest thing is sometimes effective for Concord production. So you've got to fight against that default. But I do want to push back and say, we shouldn't redefine what is expensive based on falling prices in certain materials. $6 is still cheap. $8 is still cheap.
Well, the other thing
Because
is,
something is $1 now.
you know, a lot of these materials like the pyrethroids now and before, you know, guys used, before we started to get a little bit of resistance with 7 or carbaryl, you know,
Yeah.
guys use that for 20 years straight.
Mhm.
And, you know, so they've been using the same materials. Now a lot of guys have switched to the pyrethroids. So you're using that material over and over again. And so then it comes up, okay, what about the resistance problems? You know, you start to use that year after year, you're gonna have resistance problems. These other materials also are very effective. They're targeted, and they're newer chemistries that guys haven't used. So, you know, guys should take that into consideration also. Don't
Right.
just look at, okay, this product costs me this much per acre.
Yeah, and we've run into some real issues over the years with trying to, you know, do resistance management with Grape Berry Moth, because it seems like we do lose a material just as fast as we gain them. So that's a real consideration. I mean, I think a lot of people were relying, especially in New York, on nothing but leverage 360 for a while there, and that's a problem. But one thing I did want to touch on, unless you've got something else to add with Berry Moth, Andy, is just I took a look at the cost of pruning and tying, the dormant work that takes place in Concords. I looked at the payroll of 3 different growers, all in New York. Um, and the reason I focused on New York is because they have passed a number of different pieces of legislation that have increased the cost of labor. Um, so what we're seeing is a small amount of cost being attributed to overtime. So um, pruners are being paid overtime here and there. Typically, it's for failure to take a day of rest. So they work on Sunday. And when that happens, even if they're not at 40 hours, overtime kicks in. And overtime really doesn't kick in for hours until they hit 60 hours in New York. So I didn't see any of that because it gets dark too fast in the winter and they can't prune in the dark. So I didn't see any of that. But I did see overtime for failure to take day of rest. And obviously, a lot more growers, even the small ones now, are subject to workers' comp and unemployment insurance. And workman's comp was fairly common prior to the legislation. Unemployment insurance was really hit or miss. So we're seeing a lot more costs associated with unemployment insurance. And then increasing wage pressure. And some of that is also derived by the legislation. So some of these pruners are paying into paid family leave. That comes out of their cost or out of their paycheck. But certainly things like that drive wage increases. They ask for wage increases because they see their take home pay go down. We have a labor shortage. That's making it very difficult to respond negatively when wage increases are asked for. And also because of that, I saw about half of what I looked at was hourly rates for pruners, not piece rate, which is a change. And the hourly rates were higher than piece rates, so they were not performing fast enough to keep up with what their hourly rate was. So we saw higher rates of pay for hourly workers than we did piece rate workers. I mean, talking to the growers, they were happier with the job. People went slower and did a better job, but you do want to plan for those costs and work it into your business model and make sure that you know that they're going to continue to go up as well. So we're seeing, you know, a lot of increase in wages in the wider market sector. It's not just for pruners. That's not going to help. Pennsylvania is talking about raising their minimum wage to $15 over the course of 7 years. I don't know that that's going to pass, but that's in the conversation, and it's becoming more a part of the daily conversation because nobody's making minimum wage anymore. So there's less people willing to fight a political fight about, you know, raising minimum wage to $10 when it's not going to affect anybody because everybody's already paying more than $10. Politicians aren't willing to lose political capital on that when they know it doesn't affect anybody. So we're seeing some pressure in Pennsylvania for legislation as well. It's not just New York. But what it all worked out to was between 40 and 44 cents per vine with an average of 42.5 when you weighed it, because the farms were different sizes. And pruning, so that was pruning, and another 16 cents a vine for tying. And there was a decimal place there, but I didn't write it down. I think it was 16.2 cents. So you're looking at about 58 cents a vine for all the handwork. And there's no way to eliminate tying and hand follow-up. That's just, we don't have a machine for that yet. So probably shouldn't add those two together when you're thinking about mechanization, but you're comparing that 42 cents to mechanization and then what it costs to do hand follow-up. And I think as we move towards hourly labor, the savings will continue to grow, because for the most part, hand follow-up is done at an hourly rate. So then you're comparing apples to apples. It's very difficult to do piece rate and save any money with hand follow-up. It just doesn't work. Nobody wants to work for 15 cents a vine. Even if they can cover 90 vines an hour, it's just a psychological problem. So that's up about 10% at least in the last couple of years, if not more. And I think it's going to slow down a little bit, but we're going to see 50 cents before you know it. So
It's all very encouraging, Kevin.
Well, I mean, the price of grapes is high. People are happy with the quality of the growers that paid more than 40 cents were happy with the quality of pruning, and it's going to work into everybody's business model so long as prices stay high. We have technology that offers an alternative, so it does require adoption. And I think I said this 6 years ago, or maybe it's longer. It's probably longer. Prices have been down for a while. But certainly 10 years ago, I said, now is the time to think about adoption and experiment with the adoption of mechanization, because we see that you have available capital from high prices, and we see that you can sustain these high pruning prices. But we also know for sure that over the long run, it's not going to be sustainable. So since then, the price of pruning has gone up from 32 cents to 42 cents. And the price of mechanical pre-pruning has not changed too much, depending on what you purchase. So that's about all I have. I do want to invite everybody who's tuning in, listening in, to pepper us with questions in the future, and we can address those on the next podcast. Another reminder that every Wednesday we do have virtual coffee pot meetings, and we will get back to in-person coffee pot meetings with actual coffee pots at some point in the future. We are starting to see discussions at the university levels, both from Penn State and Cornell, that are going to push us in that direction and allow us to move in that direction as we move away from, hopefully, all signs are currently pointing away from COVID situations. And I don't know if it'll be this growing season, but I wouldn't be surprised if we do have some in-person meetings in the Lake Erie region, outside at some point this summer. So it'll be great to see everybody again.
Yeah, looking forward to that.
But that's all I have for this week. Thank you again for joining us. Anything from you, Jen or Andy?
Nope, that's all I have.
I do, but I can save it.
No. Go for
I'll
it.
just touch base on it very quickly, and it's
Awesome.
not something that needs to be brushed over, but it is coming up on a holiday weekend. You'll be out with family, hopefully celebrating. And while you are, I just ask you to look for Tree of Heaven and look for spotted lanternfly nymphs. We have it on our website. It's on the New York State IPM website of what you should be looking for. But at this point, or at this stage in the game, you're going to find tiny little black bugs with white dots, or there will be black bugs with red dots. And they are, well, it's like a red pattern. They're on the website. Please take a look so that you can identify them. And if you aren't sure if it is or is not, and I received one picture while we were doing this podcast, please email it to us. We'll help you out. But if you do happen to find some, I would rather be proactive than reactive. Let's get out there. You have to notify, if you're in New York State, the Department of Ag and Markets. And if you are in Pennsylvania, it's PDA that you need to let know. But we can certainly help you with that.
If it bites you and latches on, it's probably a tick.
Yes.
But if not, it might be spotted lanternfly.
Let's just again clarify that we don't have it here and you're just being,
I'm
very
being
proactive.
overly cautious because
Yes.
there are nymphs in Ithaca, New York. So I'm just inching its way here. So if we could be a little proactive and hopefully stop it as soon as we see it, that would be a lot better than trying to catch it after it's a huge infestation. So
Yeah, I would say the march towards Ithaca sort of was a good reminder to me that it'll be here soon.
right.
We're going to have to deal with it. It doesn't sound like it's going to be this year, but certainly want to be on the lookout for nymphs so we know which year that it is going to be.
And again, in Pennsylvania, it's only 3 counties away from Erie County, Pennsylvania. So,
Yeah.
So it's on its way. And if we
on its
could
way.
just start looking before we're backpedaling, I would appreciate that. I think you would all benefit.
Thank you all for joining us. We will see you next week.
Take care.